Hello and welcome to another Magic the Gathering unboxing. So today we're going to be unboxing a Coldsnap theme deck called Beyond the Grave. So Coldsnap's a very interesting set in Magic's history. It was actually released between the Dissension set and the Time Spiral set. So we've got between the original Ravnica block and the Time Spiral block. It's released in 2006. I think June or July of that year, in a slot which normally, so we have to bear in mind that back then core sets came out every 2 years. So if you're planning on, or you're applying the current regime where you get 4 sets a year coming out. If you don't have a core set every year, then you sort of end up with this gap in the year, every other year. And there's various ways in Wizards at the time filled that. In this case, they filled it with a set which had a sort of made-up story around it, that they lost an original design file. This Coldsnap set was supposedly going to be part of the original Ice Age block, which in itself was effectively a made-up block that was retro block fitted after the fact. And so it can be quite confusing if you suddenly see this set alongside all the other Magic sets. It's a small set. When it was drafted, the problem was, of course, you couldn't practically draft it with anything. I mean, you could hunt down Ice Age and Alliances packs and try and draft it with that. But in reality, it's going to be drafted standalone. So you can, if anybody's ever tried to draft a small set that has its own interesting makeup to it, you're going to get a lot of repeat commons going on there. So the set really has to be designed with that in mind. And I didn't draft it at the time. I know it's been available on MTGO. I'm trying to think if I have actually ever drafted it through Magic the Gathering Online. I must have done, because I took part in that year of Magic where they went through the whole of Modern and did drafts every week, I think. It's tricky when you're dealing with a small set. If you want to know more, because I could go on for hours talking about it gets really complicated with the way this was put together, because of the whole sort of background story that was made up, the time with the Ice Age block, and its sort of placement in Magic between 2 sets. One set which was, I understand is like beloved by Magic players, which was the original Ravnica set, and then followed up by the Time Spiral block, which was super confusing for a lot of Magic players, particularly newer ones. So I think that whole period in Magic's history could have been very confusing if you were playing at that time. To add further the confusion, you'll see this when I open this, because there's a reference to these earlier sets. They've actually included cards in here from Ice Age and Alliances, but placed in the modern, at the time, card frame. So another layer of confusion there. Again, if you don't know much about this, you're thinking, where are these cards coming from? Why don't they have the correct set logo on them? So we're going to open this up, take a look at it. Some interesting cards in here. Probably quite underpowered and quite quirky for anybody that's used to more modern cards, because again, thematically, they're trying to tie this in with the Ice Age block. This is a red, green, black deck. The other thing they started doing at the time, I don't know when this started actually, maybe someone can tell me. These are in the fat packs as well. I remember pulling these later on when I sort of got into Magic around 10th edition, in the fat packs and boosters that I opened, they had these sort of player profile cards, and they've included them in the theme deck as well. I'll just go through this insert at the end. So Pierre Canali, and then it has the sort of stats on the back here. So let's have a look at this deck. So what you'll notice is if you keep one eye on the set logo, so the actual Coldsnap set logo, which isn't on the box but we'll see it on the cards, is a sort of triple icicle logo. But this one here, this is Ice Age, and we'll see the Alliances one. So it's just basically to highlight which cards are coming from those sets. My understanding is that the only way this particular version of the card was available was through the theme decks. You could obviously pick up the originals from the original set, but in this format with the more modern border on it, this was the only way. So we've got Skull Catapult here. I'm going to read a few of these out, more than I normally would, because it's just interesting to see the older cards here. So it's 4, and it's an artifact, and for 1 you can tap it, sacrifice a creature. Skull Catapult deals 2 damage to target creature or player. Now this one is from Coldsnap. You can see there's the logo. It's Cold Steel Hearts. It's to cast. It's a snow artifact. Cold Steel Heart comes into play tapped. As Cold Steel Heart comes into play, choose a colour. Tap, add 1 mana of the chosen colour to your mana pool. We've got a Barbed Sextant here, again back to Ice Age. It's a 1 to cast. It's artifact. 1 tap, sacrifice Barbed Sextant, add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's end step. That's referred to as a cantrip. When you get a card draw at the end of or the beginning of the next turn's end step. So there's a couple of those in here. There's a Death Spark in here from Alliances. The other thing with this is in the original sets, the set logos didn't have the colours, like sort of silver for uncommon, black for common, and then like a gold colour for the rare cards. So this was from Alliances. On this particular card, it's uncommon. I can't remember what it was in the original set. Single red is an instant. Death Spark deals 1 damage to target creature or player. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Death Spark is in your graveyard with a creature card directly above it, you may pay 1. If you do, return Death Spark to your hand. So keep an eye out for those sort of graveyard interactions that are going on. There's a lot of cards in here where it says, if there's so and so above this card. So we have 2 Death Sparks. We have a Soul Burn, which is an X and a 2 black spell from Ice Age. This would have looked slightly different on the original one, I believe. The wording was different here. It wasn't I don't think it was an X spell, but the actual rules text explained how you would spend mana on this. So it's basically sort of, referring to life gain are based on the amount of black you spend on X. But you can only spend black and or red mana on X. Crovacan Rot. This has got recover on it. So this was actually from Coldsnap. The recover mechanic was in there. So this one destroys a target creature with power 2 or less. It's 2 and a black to cast, and its recover cost is 1 black. When a creature is put into your graveyard from play, you may pay 1 black. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand, otherwise remove this card from the game. Dark Banishing is in here. That was originally from Ice Age. So 200 black, destroy target non-black creature. It can't be regenerated. I think on the original Ice Age it just said bury this creature. Oh, another Krovikan Rot there. Another Dark Banishing. Casting of Bones. So this is a way in which black can do card draw. So 200 black, enchant creature. When enchanted creature is put into a graveyard, draw 3 cards, then discard one of them. And there's a couple of those in here. There's a Grim Harvest, which has got recover on it for 200 black. It's a way of getting creature cards back from your graveyard. So there was 3 of those in here. There's Dark Ritual, originally from Ice Age, single black. You get to add 3 black to your mana pool. So here's our lead card. Sequoia Deathkeeper, 2 black, red, green for a legendary creature, Orc Shaman. Whenever another non-token creature you control is put into a graveyard from play, put a 3/1 red, black and red Graveborn creature token with haste into play. And this has 4 power and 3 toughness. Deepfire Elemental is in here, 4 black, red for a creature elemental with XX1, destroy target artifact or creature with inverted mana cost X, and it's a 4/4. We've got Orcish Blood Painter, which is from Coldsnap. Another creature with a sacrifice ability tacked onto it. Orcish Healer from original Ice Age, 2 red, 1/1, creature or cleric, 2 red tap, target creature can't be regenerated this turn. Black, black, red, target regenerate target black or green creature. Red, red, green, green, regenerate target black or green creature. Voidmaw from Coldsnap, 4 and 2 black, 4/5, creature horror with trample. And it's got this interesting ability where if another creature would be put into a graveyard from play, remove it from the game instead. Put a card removed from the game with Voidmaw into its owner's graveyard. Voidmaw gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So you get this sort of graveyard filtering going on. Gristlegrinner, another card that cares about stuff going into the graveyard, or creatures going into the graveyard. A couple of those. Disciple of Tevish Sat, it is. It's got a couple of stapled on abilities. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. 4 and 2 black. Tap, sacrifice, Disciple of Tevish Sat. Target creature gets -6/-6 until end of turn. And it's a 2 and 2 black with 3/1. You'll see on several of these cards there's a reoccurring theme, sort of that connected to that Graveborn token of power toughness of 3 and 1. Balduvian Dead was from Alliances, and another card that will generate 3/1 black and red Graveborn creature tokens, although they only last until end of turn. Of those, we've got an Ashen Ghoul, 3 and a black, another 3/1 with haste. But for 1 black, you can return Ashen Ghoul from your graveyard to play. Play this ability only during upkeep and only if 3 or more creature cards are above Ashen Ghoul. So that thing about cards being above it. Gutless Ghoul, another sack outlet card. We can sack a creature, gain 2 life. But it's 2 and a black, 2/2 for 2 and a black. Got 3 of those. Joran Dead, single black, 3/1. When it comes into play, you have to sacrifice a creature, and for single black, you can regenerate it. Insidious Bookworms, a very strange discard card. So single black, 1/1. When Insidious Bookworms is put into a graveyard from play, you may pay 1 black. If you do, target player discards a card at random, and that was from Alliances. And then we have our mana pool. Lovely artwork here. So these are, yeah, this would have the artwork, I believe, would have come from Ice Age. In some of the theme decks, they actually had the Snowlands, and that's another thing with these theme decks. Some of those decks, because they have the Snowlands in them, actually the price of the theme decks are pumped up by that. So we've got Forest and Mountains, and you can see the original Ice Age artwork on here. Sort of a big contrast to what might have been done at that time. So 3 colours here. You notice there's not an awful lot of green in the deck in terms of the mana producers. Pretty cool swamp artwork there. It's weird seeing it in the newer card frames. Oh, that was the other thing, yeah, with the theme decks of the time, and you've probably seen me when I've opened earlier theme decks, they also included a foil land. This looks pretty cool, actually. But what they did here, this was... yeah, this was artwork from ISO. So this was actually Coldsnap artwork. So we've got almost like a translucent look to it on camera. So there we have the deck. That was the Beyond the Grave deck. Let's dig out our lead card, because I want to talk a little bit about this in a moment. So yeah, that foil land is also extra. It's not, I'm pretty sure it's not part of the actual deck. In fact, the other ones I've opened, it hasn't been, so I'm assuming that's the case here. So first thing I'll do, we'll just have a look at the pack, because in here, let me just zoom out a bit first of all. Okay, so what it does is obviously it tries to explain and put this into context. So we've got the snow cards are going to be there. We've got Ripple and Recover, which were new mechanics that were created specifically for Coldsnap. And then we've got Cumulative Upkeep, because this is something that came in from the earlier sets and people may not be used to what that is. There's the Coldsnap story, and that's the actual Magic the Gathering story about, the backstory about Coldsnap and the characters in it, as opposed to the story about how Coldsnap came about. A little bit of backstory about the lead character in this deck, and then the breakdown of the deck itself here and playing the deck. So this is actually potentially a pretty complicated deck to play because of all these interactions in the grave, and you've got to be careful with this in like what things might trigger, what things don't trigger, where a card might be marked to die through, say, combat damage. You might want to actually use one of your sack outlets on it to actually properly generate whatever's triggered off of that. Some things might trigger other things, some things might not. So you've got to have a real good understanding of various interactions, how regeneration works, that sort of stuff. So yeah, pretty involved and complicated deck. But the idea is here to actually have your own creatures die, and then trigger appropriate stuff that is in play. So again, it's having a real good understanding of like things like what cards you're going to play on what turns, what stuff needs to be in play in order to maximize the triggers on other cards, and lots of like crazy interactions, keeping track of the order of creatures in your graveyard. You saw there's a couple of cards with that. And then at the very end, it's got recommendations for modifying the deck. Again, what's interesting with the things like this deck, with the Beyond the Grave deck, if If you remember, this came out just after a Ravnica block, so there was a guild in there that specifically cared about the graveyard, the Golgari guild. So that's one area to take a look at. The abilities there which interact with the graveyard, are they going to interact well with this? So they're recommending a couple of cards here. They're Golgari Germination and Savra, Queen of the Golgari. So there we have it. That's the theme deck itself. So something I thought I'd just very quickly lead into at the end of this video. So for quite a while now, it seems like a number of years, I've been talking about doing another video series about Commander. And if you remember, there was a series I did called the Commander Box Store Challenge, where we were just looking at the different products in Magic, which ones might be considered Commander friendly. So obviously starting off with the Commander decks that would be available in the big box stores, and then moving through to the least friendly product, if you like, where your hit on Commander friendly cards would be lower. So we sort of started off with, I think, obviously a Commander product, and then moved through things like the dual decks, which often have older cards in them, and then moved through to, I think I picked a set where there was a high Commander count, which would have, I think, Magic 2013, which I think all the rares were EDH sort of Commander playable, and then moving on to almost like I think I tried a Deck Builder's Toolkit, and then in the end I think may have even tried the odd booster pack here and there. Interesting series. It's still on the channel, well worth watching again just to go through. Since then I've obviously added various stuff to that original pool of cards, so I think I probably added in a couple more Commander, or at least one more Commander product into there. Other things I did was, most of the toolkits you've seen me open on the channel since then have gone into there in some form. So again, all the cards that were sort of Commander friendly would have ended up in there, plus a few other things that I want to talk about when I get around to the series, which is this whole concept of EDH toolkits, and where that sort of comes from, or where I picked up on it, and how that might help us with the series. So our first card that or item we're going to use to start the series off is this deck. So the series is going to be called Commander Fodder, and it's particularly focusing mainly on precons. So looking at precons, and we've all had that experience with a precon where we've opened it up and we've maybe gone, oh, these cards would be really interesting in multiplayer, or there's a legendary in here I wouldn't mind playing, or a planeswalker I wouldn't mind sticking in my Commander deck, the usual stuff, or very cards that are very political, or maybe older mana rocks, that sort of stuff. So the idea is to basically take a deck and use cards from it, as much of the deck as you can, to basically build a Commander deck. Now there'll be a specific approach to this, which you'll see when I do the series, and it does revolve around also constructing some reusable toolkit components. So in this one we're going to be playing black, red, green. So the spin-off of this is that what if you were able to produce a sort of base black, red, green toolkit of a certain amount of cards, which could then be removed, and you could place in another black, red, green deck in there without some of those cards not making sense, or what would you have to remove. So it's really going to be about developing a process over the course of the series by which you can have a set of toolkits, if you like, built around certain color combinations or certain broad themes, So with the black, red, green, we're going to be tackling the issue of that colour combination plus sack type theme, sacrificing theme. With this deck, probably not so heavily on. So there's several ways you can go with a Sekar Deathkeeper. You can sort of go the way that, because this card was actually included in a Commander product, it was in the Prosh deck. And so in that deck, there was a token theme in there. With this particular angle, I'm probably going to go on it. I'm much more interested in the sacrifice interactions that are going on between this card and the graveyard. So it's more of a graveyard based deck. So we're going to be looking at, what underlying foundation, if you like, to the deck would be really useful. Then sliding the cards into that and deciding what do we want to keep, what don't we want to keep. What other cards that aren't in the toolkit element do we need to add in? What would be good to play around with in terms of the mana base, that sort of stuff. But then at the end of it, what you end up is this nice finished deck, hopefully. But then there's a component in there that can be reused. So you can say, okay, if I slide out the Sekar Deathkeeper, for this is an example, but keep a core universal element for a particular theme, be it a color theme, be it some other thematic thing. If it's another, using another example, supposing we built, we picked another deck that was a monocolor deck that had a strong tribal theme, and maybe there were elements in that deck. Maybe it's a mono white deck which had was a flyer, but then some tribal thing stapled on top of that. So it could be angels, it could be another tribe of flyers in Magic. But within that deck, there's going to be a component which just really cares about, one, being a white deck, having white cards in it, two, having flyers in it, basically, and just forgetting about what particular creature type it is. And so you're going to have a core element in there that does actually just care, is this card a white card? So I'm going to give it, I'm going to pump it, or does this particular creature fly? Any flyers in the deck get whatever, or do I want to give other creatures flyers? Other creatures flying, that sort of thing. Basically, I think what's the term, lieutenants, although not the lieutenant mechanic as used in Commander, but just this idea of lords. That's what I'm thinking of, like in Lords in Magic, where you have these cards which say other cards of this type get this. So, what part of the deck could you just pull out from that white flyers tribal deck, and then use another tribe that flies and is white as well, and put that on top? So that's really where I'm sort of going with this. There might be instances where maybe as a starting point for Commander fodder, we use a pack opening. Now, I'm not, for this, what I'm going to do, because pack openings are so hit and miss and quite wasteful for this sort of video, I'm probably going to be using my favourite budget packs from Dollarama, because they seem to have quite a good hit on the legendaries. And if you remember when I did my last video on was it Saturday Morning Nostalgia one, no, hang on, what am I saying, sorry, Masters 25, that was it. We opened some Dollarama packs just as a contrast, and I got a Mundi Ambush Leader, and again, I think I mentioned we could use this for Commander fodder, and we'll do a red-white ally deck. So yeah, that's something in the future. I'm thinking probably too far ahead here, and making a nice rod for my back again. So anyway, there we have it. That was the Coldsnap Beyond the Grave deck with Sekar Deathkeeper as our lead card, and also our lead into the Future Series Commander fodder. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.